Okay, let's talk about lesson planning. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a whole lesson plan here. It'll be a little bit more lengthy than normal, but it's a very important topic for us to discuss. So the very first thing that I want to talk about is that there are lots of different ways to lesson plan, but the two ways that we are going to look at this is from the point of view of a lady named Madeline Hunter, and also from the point of view of a lady named Marsha Tate. Okay, so Hunter gives us these steps to lesson plan, and Tate really brings it together because her methodology is all based in brain research. Okay, so what we really need to think about is why do we lesson plan? Okay, and so I'll give you a couple seconds to think about that. And while you're thinking about it, I want you to think about either your own past experience as a student, or maybe even as a swim coach or a dance instructor or something like that. And if you think about the process of the plan, whether you're a coach or whether you're a teacher in the classroom or you're standing on the side of a swimming pool, there's many steps that are the same, especially when we are doing something called direct teaching, which is what Hunter, her whole methodology or her steps are based around that. But if we get back to why do we lesson plan, some of the words that should have came out were it helps keep you organized. Maybe it builds your confidence because you have a plan in front of you. You're not winging it, right? Helps you maybe with some time management. I'm just going to abbreviate that. Okay. It also makes sure that you're following or completing the curricular outcomes. Of course, also under TQS number 3, it talks about your ability to lesson plan, short range lesson planning like a daily lesson plan, medium range, which is like unit plans, and it also talks about your long range planning, which is like year plans. So it all falls under those things. And of course, there could be lots of other reasons, okay? If you came up with other reasons, that's awesome. So when you write a lesson plan, what you need to think about is that you are writing it for someone else. So you are writing the plan for someone else. Okay? So what I'm saying is this, or what I'm kind of maybe alluding to is this, is that what happens if you can't come to work tomorrow, or you break your leg and you're off for a few days or a month or however long, right? You need to leave plans that other people can understand. So what I want you to focus on when you're actually doing these here in the near future is I'm writing this plan for somebody else, which means that you need to be very detailed, okay? And in some instances, it's almost like a script of what you're going to say and do, what the students are going to say and do, and that kind of idea. So we want to make sure that these are very detailed. And of course, because you're not going to be able to have a conversation, the detailed, is going to be text-based, right? Because you are writing this out or typing it out, whichever way you decide to plan. Okay, so you can't explain it to them verbally, so you need to make sure that they're text-based and that they are in detailed enough that somebody could teach your lesson, even if they don't know your subject, right? And I always tell students is, in this day and age, sometimes it's very hard to find a sub, and sometimes your admin ends up subbing for you. So do you want to leave a poor lesson plan for your administrator? Probably not. And if you did, you're probably going to hear about it when you get back. to work. Okay. So one of the other things that I'm just going to say about Hunter here is that so I'm just going to write her name down again. Hunter, her methodology was based on something we call direct teaching. Okay. And that is basically when you are standing at the front of the class and doing your thing. So what Hunter realized, so she did some research on this, and what she realized is that, I'll just make a new page here, there we go, is that after observing all of these teachers doing their thing in their classrooms, that there were several steps that they all did, okay, when they were direct teaching. So one important thing to remember is that it's for direct teaching, because if you do a search of Hunter's methodology on the internet, you're going to find that there are some people who are proponents of it and people who disagree with her methodology. By and large, from my own work and research with it, those people don't understand that her system was developed for direct teaching. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that there aren't elements of Hunter's methodology that aren't in every type of teaching, because there are. Okay? And when we walk through the steps here in the next few minutes, we'll think about that. Okay, so again, remember that her methodology was based in direct teaching, which is like stand and deliver, give them the goods kind of idea. Okay, so if we look at the steps, we're going to look at 9 steps. And again, if you were to search this on the internet, you might find anywhere between 7 and 9, and we're going to go with the 9. Well, 8 in a way that would say are pure Hunter. But the 9th it doesn't belong to her, but came kind of afterwards, which I agree with, and I think it's important. Okay, so the very first step, and these steps are in an order. Often, I say that no particular order, but these are in an order. Okay, so the very first step is anticipatory set, or it's called anticipatory set. Now, many people, including Tate, like I said, is the other person that we're talking about when we're doing this lesson planning. Some people just call it the hook. Okay? It's certainly a smaller mouthful than anticipatory set. Much easier to spell too, right? So what's happening in anticipatory set? Well, there could be a number of things that occur in an anticipatory set, but generally speaking, it's some type of a short activity. Okay, and really the length of any of these steps actually is really dependent on how much time you have to teach the lesson. So if you're thinking, kindergarten, you probably got, 10 to 15 minutes to teach a lesson before the kids start losing it. And of course, with adults, you might have quite a bit longer, or with high school students. And so you might have 90 minutes. So depending on the length of time depends on how much time you can spend on any one of these steps. I think that the anticipatory set should probably be no longer than about 10 minutes, okay? So it's a short activity or some type of a prompt, okay, that focuses students' attention on you, that focuses student attention, I'm going to abbreviate that, on the teacher. Okay? And we're going to go, so that's kind of maybe the classic definition of it. And so what we're going to look at now is what Tate offers to this, which I think is very important. So she offers this acronym, and I'm going to make it N squared with a small a big M, which I'm going to type again or write again, okay, and an E. So we've got ourselves an acronym, and the reason that I use N squared is because there's 2 N's in this acronym. So I just put it as name because it just helps me remember that, okay? So if we look at the acronym, or what Tate says, she says the following things: that if you can show students a need to listen to you or pay attention to you or focus on you, then you've got them hooked, okay? She also says that if you do something that's novel or has novelty in it, you've got them hooked. She says that if you can show why this is meaningful or what the meaning of this or what it means to them, then you've got them hooked. And she also says if you can evoke an emotion, then you've got them hooked as well. Okay, so you don't have to do all of those. Any one of those or even a combination of those are super effective. Now, if we look at those steps again, so let's look at need first, right? Is, why might this topic matter to me? Or why might the question that you're proposing to your students matter to them? Why might it matter to the people around them, like family, friends, the city, the nation, the globe, right? Why might it matter to the world even? Okay, so what it does under need is it establishes the reason for learning. Okay, so I'm just going to go establish the reason for learning. We're going to have to move these around a little bit for learning. Learning. Okay. And so it evokes the brain to start thinking, right? So whatever the need is or the reason that you can find for students to hook students with this, that's kind of the important part. Okay, now I'm going to leave novelty till the end, but we can talk about meaning for a second. So when we talk about meaning, right, is there a connection? Okay, is there some type of connection to their lives? And when I say there, of course, I mean students, right, to their lives, right? And really what you think about is, the question that we've all asked is, why do I have to learn this, right? So if there's some connection to their lives, and it shows that there's a meaningful reason for them to pay attention to you, then you've got them hooked. Of course, when we talk about emotion, right, we're talking about anytime you can hook into people's feelings, right? You've got their attention, of course, and hopefully it's in a positive way, right? Right. So I mean, things as curiosity or surprise, right? So curiosity, surprise, right? And even empathy or sympathy in there. We'll throw those kind of things. And of course, there's lots of other words we could use, right? And so one of the, in any of these things so far that we've mentioned, if you can relate some type of, I'll just write it in here because it fits there. Right? If you can, create a story or some type of narrative, then of course that even hooks them in even more. And then the last one we're going to talk about is novelty. I guess I'll just have to draw like an arrow over here. And of course, when I speak of novelty, right, we are, something that is fun, something that maybe is unusual. Okay, so again, you kind of, in a way, almost want to catch kids off guard, in a way, okay? Because the way the human brain works is that we filter out things that aren't kind of new to us, right? We love routine, we love patterns. As soon as that is broken, that's when it gets our attention. So we want to, have it be fun. We want it to be unusual, even potentially, and maybe even unexpected. Okay. And of course, it's something that breaks the routine. So let's write that down too here, that it might help break routine a little bit. Okay. And, it could be anything like playing a song. It could be playing a video. It could be some type of quick demonstration, right? It could be something fun or unusual that you do that makes the kids laugh. So then there you are. If you've got emotion in there. So that kind of idea. So novelty meaning like something new, right? Okay. So that's a big piece, right? That's just step one of lesson planning. And so if we add another page on here, then what we're going to look at here is the next step, which is the purpose, okay, for the lesson. And again, this ties into sort of why students need to learn. I'll say just this, right? The topic. Okay. And so, and also what they'll be able to do with that new information or that new knowledge. And then also, how will they show understanding, right? And so often you'll see it phrased like this. Students, so again, we could also add at the beginning, by the end of this lesson or by the end of this section of my lesson, students will be able to, and I'll just go ... right? Because it is based on what you're doing in the classroom. Okay? So the next step then, what we have here, step 3 of 9, okay, is input. And input very simply is the words, the terms, the phrases, right? I'm just going to put the language that students would need to understand the lesson. So in a minute or two here, I'm going to walk us through some of these steps, okay? And I'm going to show you, like, if you in the example, if students didn't know these words, then they wouldn't get the lesson. Okay, so that's what really input is we could put I'm gonna put in here some concepts maybe as well, things like that. Okay, so that's input. And so I might as well just do the example now for you. So let's think about long division. Okay, and I'm just going to do it very simply. It goes into 2, 4, 6, 8. So now what I'm going to ask you and give you a couple seconds to think about is, where I've got arrows drawn, very poor arrows, but arrows nonetheless, what words are attributed to these parts of a long division question? Okay, so if you said, first of all, I'm just going to draw one more line right to this little kind of L thing that we draw here. So let's go through what the names are. So this first number out here is a divisor. Okay, so that takes you back to elementary school math. There you go. Okay, inside this number is called the dividend. Most of you probably got the answer to a division question is a quotient. Okay, and then some people refer to this L thing as the house. Okay, so again, if students didn't know these words or what these words are or what the numbers and the words refer to each other, they would have a very hard time understanding your lesson, especially if I said, hey, student, what's the divisor in this question, right? That kind of idea. And then, of course, other words that they would need to know in a long division question is they would need to know what a difference is, because there is subtraction in these. They might need to know the word factors because we're multiplying, right? They might need to know then the word product because that's the answer to a multiplication question. So there's a bunch of different words just in doing a simple long division question that maybe as an adult or a teacher we might take for granted, but these are words that kids would need to know. So that's sort of step 3. And sometimes you might give them a definition sheet. If this is something in a textbook, often either at the beginning or the end of a textbook, it's kind of like words to know, that kind of, or vocabulary, right? So that's another word we can use here is vocabulary for this part of the lesson. And all of the step 2 and step 3, they kind of go off the lesson plan where students wouldn't necessarily see it. This is more teacher stuff. Okay, but now we're really getting into some student stuff. Okay, so the next step, number 4, is modeling. Okay, and whether you spell it with 2 L's or 1 L, it doesn't matter to me. Okay, so modeling is, or another word that we can use and is just another one is demonstration. Okay, so that might be an easier one to remember in your mind of you're giving a demonstration. Okay, so, and again, it can be whether it could be something hands-on, right? It could be a video. It doesn't have to be you giving the demonstration. Okay, it could be an image or a series of images. Just wait till my thing gets its act back together here. There we go. Let me just go. I'm the host. Fantastic. Okay, there we go. Oops. Oh, did it not record those? Oh, nuts. Okay, so let's go back to number 4 as modeling. Okay. The wonderful part about technology is great when it works. So modeling. Okay, so again, think of it as demonstration. Okay, so as demonstration, and again, it could be something that is hands-on that you're doing, you're showing them. Okay, think of folding a paper airplane, right? And of course, you can also model something like that, could be in your anticipatory set. So it could be something hands-on. It could be something that maybe is video or even audio based. So some type of video or audio. I'll put audio down there this time. Okay. It also could be some type of an image or a series of images. Okay. And what it really is, what the finished product looks like. So if you think again of a long division question, what does a long division question look like when it's finished? And of course, we could have long division questions with or without remainders. What the finishing product looks like. I'll just go product looks like. Okay, so that is what happens during modeling. So in that stage, I would walk students through a question, and we'll just do that really just briefly here, and we'll use the one we had before because it's really easy, right? So in modeling, I would say maybe, or something like this. All right, so when we are doing the first step here, what we're thinking of is a couple of things. Sometimes people say, how many times does 2 go into 2? Or sometimes we could say, and I'll just put a little multiplication symbol there, 2 times what equals 2? And of course, we all know that that's 1. And then, of course, I would model showing that you then make a subtraction question of that. And of course, we subtract them, get the difference. And then what I do when I've taught this in the past with kids is then I just make a new house. And then I say, then you bring down the 4. And then we say again, 2 goes into 14 how many times? Or 2 times what equals 14? And we know that's 7. And so then we get 14. And of course, the difference is 0. And then we just repeat that process again and again, right? So then we would have, the final quotient of 1,734. And I might do a couple of those. I might do several, depending on how I'm feeling, whether the students are picking it up or not. Okay. And, in this step, I might give them an acronym, or I might tell them the steps. And we could use this acronym here. And this one. And some people call it does McDonald's sell burgers. Right? So help them remember the steps for the process of divide, multiply, subtract, and bring down. Okay? So that's modeling. And then once I'm done modeling, and what I'm hoping then is that I can move on to the next step, which is the 5th of the 9, which is what we refer to as guided practice. Okay? And as we're going through these steps, I also want you to think about, in your past, think about your lessons that you've had from teachers. Have they worked through these types of steps or process before? Okay? So here, sometimes they call this the follow me stage. Okay? And so then what we're going to do is, I'm just going to do another 2, 6, 8. I'll say 4 because it'll make it easy again. So I might write a couple of questions on the board, right? Right? Something like that. And then I might ask students to go through the process. And so I might say, Jordan, what's the first step? And they would say, blah, blah, blah. And by the time we were done, we'd have both of these questions done. So I'm walking them through So I'm walking students through the steps. Okay, so, and then the next step kind of comes in hand here. And I also want to write down that this is also the sort of like hear, see, do portion as well of the lesson. Okay, and then we're going to move on to the next step, which is step 6. But the cool thing about step 6 is that it occurs actually throughout the entire lesson. So if we want to put a little star beside that or circle it or something, right? Number 6 is called check for understanding. Okay, and we'll fondly refer to it from now on as CFU, understanding. Okay, so we don't have to write out all those words. So we'll just go CFU, okay, as our little kind of abbreviation. And really, check for understanding is just exactly what it sounds like. It is, sort of the, got it yet stage. Got it yet, right? So, what ways do we check for understanding? Of course, the number one way would be we ask questions, verbal questions. Sometimes they're written questions. It could be any kind of questions, really. But generally speaking, in a lesson, you are going to ask students to see if they get it or not, right? And so this informs whether you're going to move forward or, I'll just write or, go back. Because at this stage, if you check for understanding and you're like, I don't think they get it, then you have to go back all the way back up to modeling and start again. Okay. Now, sometimes you can do that with the whole class, depending on how many of them are getting it or not getting it. You can also do it with small groups, and even honestly, you could even do it like individually. Okay. But at the check for understanding stage, if they don't get it, you can't go forward. Okay. Because that's just going to lead to all kinds of problems for you and for the students, right? So we want to set them up for success. So we want to make sure that they get it at this stage before we move forward. Now, again, I put this little asterisk, with it, saying that it not only does it happen at step 6, but it certainly happens throughout the entire lesson. Okay, so we're always checking for understanding throughout our lessons. Okay, so that was step number 6. Step number 7 is something called independent practice. Okay, so it is exactly what it sounds like. They're doing it on their own now. Okay. Okay. So I'll just say individual work, because now I want to see, back in guided practice, where I'm kind of like polling the audience or asking a few students here, to explain, tell me, that kind of idea. And then when I'm checking for understanding, I want to see that now I've got kind of the group think, but I don't really know if everybody gets it. So when we do independent practice, every student's going to work on some questions, right? It's a typical turn to page 23, do the first 5 questions, or you hand out a worksheet, and here, again, we're doing long division thinking again here, do the first 2 questions on the worksheet, and I'm going to come around and look at everybody's work or whatever. Okay. So it's individual work. Okay, there's lots of ways to tackle this. It could be done independently. It could be done in partners. It just depends on, again, all about time. Okay, so the other thing that I want to stress here is this is not only homework. Okay, so you need to leave time in your lesson for independent practice, because you can't do that, what I just said, turn to page 30 and do the first 5 questions, or do this worksheet, take it home or whatever, and then send them home, and then they all get home and they all forget what all the steps are, they forget how to do it, and then that just leads to problems like them coming with their homework not done, or turning the parent into the teacher, which then is just going to tick the parents off. So it's always good to leave a little bit of time in your lesson to see if students individually understand what they're supposed to do. Okay, and again, it can be in lots of different ways we can accomplish that. Now, step number 8 is going to bring this whole thing together and to an end, and of course, we call that closure. Okay, now closure does, or is supposed to do, 2 things. Let me back up for a second. I said leave time for independent practice. We also need to leave time for closure. And I'm a bit of a hypocrite when I say this because often I just run out of time and don't have time for the closure piece. So again, we need to try to leave time for closure because it does a couple of really important things. It provides an opportunity to do a summary of the lesson or some type of review, maybe like a Kahoot game or an exit ticket or something like that. So I'm going to write those down. I mean, Kahoot's popular. I use it a lot. Or something like an exit ticket or slip. Okay. And again, how sophisticated you want to get with either one of these or any type of closure is all dependent on time. Okay, so we want to leave some time for closure so that we can summarize, or review. And again, it could be in a format of what I've got there. But also the other thing, I'm just going to write this kind of like a little A and a little B beside these ones because it does two things. And it brings the lesson to an end. Brings the lesson to an end. Okay, and that's usually by you saying, all right, everyone, thanks for a great day. Put your stuff away. Get ready for the bell to ring, something like that. It could be something like, put your stuff away, line up at the door for gym, or, things like that. But it brings the lesson to an end. So if we're doing long division, we're doing math, it's like, all right, everybody put your stuff away, line up for recess, line up for gym. But it's bringing that lesson to a definite end. Okay? The ninth step, which is not hunters, is peer teaching. Peer teaching. So a guy named Fred Jones, Dr. Fred Jones, I'll put that here, Fred Jones, said that, hunter steps were great, but the thing that should have included was an opportunity for kids to peer teach. Because I always say, what is the best way to know if somebody understands a concept or understands something is if they can teach it, right? Teaching each other or helping each other, right? That kind of idea. So peer teaching, and again, it's number 9, but it could happen anytime during the lesson, from at the very beginning all the way to the very end. I just mentioned it as number 9 because it's not really a true hunter step. Okay, and so your job then, using all of these steps, we can just say this, that that your job is to, and this is in the TQS as well. See, your job is to design a learning path that ends in a creative or evaluative task. Okay? And so that's another way that we see if kids get it is if they can create what the thing we were modeling. Let's go now. Let's just switch gears for a second. Go back to the paper airplane, right? If they can create a paper airplane that does what it's supposed to do, or some type of other evaluative task, like I said, whether it be some questions that they have to do, or a little mini quiz, or something like that. But your job is to design this whole pathway so that it ends in one of these types of tasks. Okay, and lesson planning is one of the most important, if not the most important, skill that you're going to need to know. The second most important is, or in that 1, 2, we can switch, they probably can switch places many times during a school day, is classroom management. And I can tell you right now that in your student teaching practicums and in your first couple of years of teaching, when you're trying to meet the competencies from the teaching quality standards document and trying to show that you're a good teacher, where beginning teachers end up not being successful is that they don't plan well, or they don't know how to plan at all, however that happens, I don't know, and that they can't manage a class. So typically when I look at students who've been in practicums in our program, the students that end up not being successful is because of either one of those things, planning or management, or both. and either they're not successful in the fact that they fail their practicums, or they have to withdraw and take a second shot at the practicum. Okay, so knowing how to plan properly is really, really important. So one of the things I said at the beginning is that this was direct teaching. So that's that stand and deliver, you're at the front of the class and you're teaching, right? That's what you get paid for. But one of the questions that might come to your mind at some point, or because I know it certainly did with me when I was a beginning teacher, was, well, how much should I be at the front of the class? And one of my former administrators gave me this sort of ratio. Is he said, when you look at the span of several lessons, maybe it's the whole unit even, okay, is he said that about 1/3 of the time, and again, this could be over a 2-month span, over the span of the whole time, the whole unit or the whole set of lessons, is about 1/3 of it should be teacher directed. Okay, and that's where you stand and deliver. Okay, that's you. Students are looking at you and you're teaching. Okay, he said that, and I agree with these ratios. I've kind of held to them in my career. 1/3 of that time should be student directed. Okay, where they're kind of leading their own learning or doing inquiry-based types of things. And then going with Fred Jones, he said that 1/3 of the time should be collaboration, where kids are working together, right? We're very social animals, and we love to work with others. And so he said that, so again, if you're looking at it over a span of a unit, which might be anywhere between 20 to 40 lessons, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And again, you don't have to have a stopwatch out there, seeing how much time you spend. It's just an estimate. Also, this is not I'm teaching a 90-minute lesson today, and so 30 minutes should be me, 30 minutes should be students, 30 minutes they should be working with a partner. That's not that's not the spirit of what this is. Okay, it's a holistic view over the span of a set of lessons, and again, it could be a unit or it could be 10 lessons, that kind of idea. Okay, so that's really important for us to know. And of course, also, we said it way back earlier too, but our outcomes are really, really important, right? So that you know how to find them, you know how to implement them, and you know how to evaluate them. So that's really, really important. Okay. So when we look at your lesson plan template, one of the things that Tate professes in her research is it's brain-based learning. So really, what we've created is what I call a brain lesson plan. Okay, and what that lesson entails is kind of two pieces. Is we have the chunk and we have the chew. Okay, and the chunk part is the learning part, or it can be the teaching part. I'll go learning, teaching. Okay, and the chew is the activity. Okay, and so we need to know that. We need to know that content chunking and I'm going to borrow a bit of a title of one of the articles, is content chunking is key. Okay? Because the research of the brain and of learning is very clear. And it's very clear in what respect is this respect. And this is what Marcia Tate's research is all about. So I'm going to kind of throw another kind of ratio at you. Tate says, and others say as well, that the adult brain has about a 20-minute attention span. Okay, and that's adult. Okay? So when you're doing your chunk, it should be no longer than 20 minutes or no more than 7 new pieces of information. Okay? And that is for somebody that you might consider like an adult, even a grade 11, 12 student kind of idea. Okay. And then in the lesson plan template that we made, we had these segments, and in each segment had a chunk and it had a chew, including anticipatory set and including the closure. And sometimes our chew is kind of both, but in the anticipatory set and in the closure. But in all the other parts of the lesson, you should have this built in. Okay? So one of the things then that we also need to think about is that so this is for an adult, as kids get younger, that these numbers decrease. So when we're looking at a kindergarten grade 1 kid, this is like 20 minutes like maximum, and this is probably around 2 to 3 things potentially. There's a chart in Google Classroom that I've created in conjunction that I kind of borrowed from a guy named Jensen. And Jensen made a chart, but I kind of extrapolated it for our uses. Eric Jensen, I think his name is. And so we're going to use that chart to dictate our lessons for the actual lesson plan assignment. Okay, but content chunking is important. And of course, I'm going to write some numbers down here. 10%. And you've seen lots of these different types of scales, but I'm just going to write this one down because this is kind of the one that I like. Okay. And this kind of goes with the spirit of what we're talking about here with chunking or like remembering. Okay. And then I'm going to go 95%. Okay. So we remember, and this is based on a guy named Edgar Dale. And this goes all the way back to 1946. Okay, the human brain and how we learn has not changed. I just watched a YouTube video today talking about the human brain and from an evolutionary standpoint, the human brain has not changed in 200,000 years. So the way that our ancestors learned is exactly the same way that we learn as well. So what Dale said is that we remember 10% of what we read. Okay. And of course, that's unless we manipulate that reading and review it and do things like that. Okay. But if you just flat out read something, 10% of what you read. Okay. We remember 50% of what we see. And hear. Okay. We remember 20% of what we hear. What we hear. Okay. And then he also said that then, if we think back to collaboration or to peer teaching, we remember 70% of what we discuss with others. I'm just going to use this symbol for with. Oh, that's really bad. Let me just do this one more time. With others. I think it's a shorthand symbol. I've used it for years. I just can't remember where I got it from. You could also use a W and a slash for with. Okay, so 70% of what we discuss with others, 30% of what we see. And if you don't believe that, that's why eyewitness testimony is the least dependable testimony in court, because our brains interpret things that we see differently and we forget very easily. Okay. We remember 80% of what we personally experience, of what we personally experience. And I was going to put EXP on there. Okay. And ta-da, going back to Fred Jones in collaboration, we remember 5% of what we teach to others. So when I said, how do you know when somebody, actually understands? There you go. There's the numbers. So this research doesn't lie. You could Google Dale, or you could Google this type of thing on the internet, and you'd see varying different numbers, but these ones I really like. Okay. I want to throw one other thing out there too, that most of you should learn in like an introductory type of education class like our Ed 1500 class is that there's 3 learning modalities. Okay, and if you can tap into any one of these or a combination of these or all of them, then you're going to have students retain a lot more information that you're teaching. Modalities. Okay, and they're not hard. They're things that happen to us naturally. One is visual, right? So if we look up at our percentage chart here, you'll see that, right, of what we see, 30%. Another one is auditory, so of what we hear. Okay, so that's one of the other learning modalities. And then the last one is kinesthetic, right? Our hands-on stuff. Kinesthetic. Okay, so the one thing that we don't see on this chart that are in some other charts is what percentage of things that we actually do kind of idea, right? Or with our hands-on stuff. So these are the 3 learning modalities. And of course, any one of these things are powerful in their own way, but also if we combine them, then, if we went, let me just back this off for 1 sec. If we did it this way, if we had visual and auditory plus kinesthetic, then, you would have or a better chance of students retaining or retention of that information. Okay, so those are 3 learning modalities, and I think that we need to know that. Now, when we talk about all of these things, we also want to talk a little bit about just about memory. So when we talk about memory,